Hydropower is a great source of energy that doesn't suffer from the same intermittency problems as other renewables, but dams fail a lot. About 95% of the existing hydropower systems in the States were built before 1995, and over half operate using equipment designed over 80 years ago. Now, this aging infrastructure can be not only unreliable, but dangerous to local populations, human and animal alike. That said, hydropower doesn't always have to be postcard perfect or 67 stories high. It actually has a lot of room for growth, possibly by shrinking. Now, that's because small hydropower, or SHP, has the potential to literally usher in a new generation. Several companies are working toward integrating hydroelectric turbines on a smaller scale and with a smaller ecological footprint. Now, between new designs like Vortex Hydrokinetics bladeless turbine and Turbulent's snail-shaped, fish-friendly system, say that 10 times fast, there's plenty of opportunity to take advantage of rivers without having to worry about the safety of ourselves or our scaly friends. So how else can small hydro impact our lives? And why should we give a damn? I'm Matt Ferrell. Welcome to Undecided. This video is brought to you by 8 Sleep, but more on that later. Several of you have shared with me some exciting developments in hydropower that look to combine hydroelectric efficiency and safety on a micro scale. Now, these include the likes of SHP bladeless turbines by Vortex Hydro, yes, bladeless, and the company Turbulent. Now, this video was also inspired by my friend Ryan's coverage of Vortex bladeless design a few months back. He goes into detail when explaining the engineering side of things, so if you're interested in the nuts and bolts, be sure to check out his video. It's really great. Now, we'll be diving deep into how these turbines work, further downriver. But before we do that, let's talk about why there's so much interest in small hydro and decentralization, and what's at stake here. With SHP, nearby communities can reap the benefits of electricity produced by constantly flowing water without the typical dam mainstays of high velocity, high volume of flow, and high, heights, otherwise known as the hydraulic head. The hydraulic head is an important part of our energy calculation. If you don't know what that is, don't worry, I didn't either. Hydraulic is, related to water, and head is the potential energy per unit of weight. So a higher tower has a higher head. Now, potential energy is calculated using this quantity, and the larger the drop, the more potential energy is available, as any daredevil who rides over the edge of a waterfall will tell you, if they can still talk after doing it. So let's zoom out here for an example of just how powerful these elements can be. You can't get a much better study of the hydroanatomy than the Itaipu Dam. It's one of the world's largest. Now, situated in the Parana River that straddles the border between Brazil and Paraguay, this massive monolith stretches on for nearly 8 kilometers, or about 5 miles. It stands at a whopping 196 meters, or 643 feet high. And for reference, if we spin our globe just a bit to the right towards the coast of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, we can wave to the famous statue known as Christ the Redeemer. The Itaipu Dam is about as tall as 6.5 Christs stacked together. So to say the dam has a huge head is a bit of an understatement, and its flow rate of 62,200 cubic meters per second is equivalent to about 985 million gallons a minute. That's about 40 times the average rate of the nearby Iguazu Falls, and about 500,000 times more than the standard flow of a faucet here in the US. And the impressive size of these dams represents a huge capital investment, and they only work in certain areas. And thankfully, you don't have to go big or go home, damn it. With clever engineering, SHP companies like Vortex Hydro and Turbulent have created turbines that can make use of shorter, slower streams of water, which means expanded access to renewable energy generation in a much broader spectrum of sites. In other words, there's no need to go chasing waterfalls, and more remote areas can stick to the rivers and lakes that they're used to. So let's start with Vortex Hydro's approach. Now, Vortex turbines are a form of hydroelectric generation that has been around for some time. They weren't even invented in this century. But even though the technology has been around for ages, it stands to be improved with modern advancements. Vortex Hydro is a US-based company that does just that. They offer the Sea-Tour, a modern bladeless turbine model that also is a form of, Vortex Hydro. A team of researchers at the Czech Technical University, including Miroslav Sedlacek, originally developed and patented this novel design over the course of 12 years. How exactly do you turn a hydroelectric turbine without blades? Well, before I get into that, there's another piece of water-based technology that I've been testing for the past year that's really changed how I sleep, and that's today's sponsor, 8 Sleep. I'm pretty sure I'm not alone when I say that I struggle to get a good night's sleep every single night. Now, I either get overheated in the middle of the night and have to throw off the covers, or get too cold and need to pull an extra cover on. And when I don't get a consistent sleep, I tend to get migraine headaches, which is not fun. Now, I've been using 8 Sleep's pod cover for a little over a year now, and I've seen huge improvements in the quality of my sleep. Our bodies usually drop in temperature as we fall asleep, cool down even further in REM sleep, and then warm back up as we wake. The cover tracks your sleep stages and temperature and automatically adjusts the temperature up or down to improve your sleep based on the sleep stages. Yes, it actually heats and cools. It's pumping heated and cooled water through the fitted bed pad. And you can adjust each side of the bed independently so your partner can have their own preferences. And my wife is absolutely loving the 8 Sleep Pod. I've seen a huge improvement in how I'm sleeping each night, and I miss it when I'm traveling and staying in hotels. Use the promo code in the link in the description to get one today. I highly recommend it. Thanks to 8 Sleep and to all of you for supporting the channel. So how exactly do you turn a hydroelectric turbine without blades? With the power of Charybdis.
It's Charybdis!
If that's Greek to you, let's frame it in terms of the ultimate metaphor for Archimedean mathematics: personal hygiene. Now, you know the fun little whirlpools that we witness every time we drain a bathtub? Well, in this case, it was whirlpools found along the Vltava River in Prague that initially inspired Sedlacek to study vortexes in hopes of harnessing their energy. So imagine what would happen if you stuck a rotor, and stay with me here, in these swirling waves. It would pretty much look like this. And now that we've got that ball rolling, we can talk about the rolling fluid turbine, as the Seator was initially called. Basically, the flowing water sets the rotor into 2 types of motion. It rolls around the inside of the stator, and the rotor itself is rotating, cranking the generator. It's almost like a basketball rolling around the inside of the hoop. The basketball is sliding around the hoop as well as rotating around its own center. Water flowing through the shape of the gap between the rotor and the stator causes the vortex that will continuously make the entire rotor roll along the edge of the stator. However, it's the rotation of the rotor itself that cranks the generator. It's rotationception. Another aspect of Seator that makes it really stand out, besides its lack of blades, is that it's not your typical microhydro system. It doesn't need a dam, though you can incorporate it into a water body that already has one. It doesn't divert from its source, though you can route water to it through piping. Instead, it works below the surface of your channel of choice to create its vortex. As a reminder, if you want to learn more about the engineering behind Seator, I highly recommend Ryan's video. And the inventors also published a theoretical analysis on their design in 2022, because like all physics, there's still a sense of mystery to it. Now, the Seator comes in 2 models: the Seator M, which is rated for 500 watts with a 750 watt maximum, and the Seator L, rated for 5 kilowatts with a 7.5 kilowatt maximum. Now, with the former, you can expect to produce anywhere from 4,300 to 6,500 kilowatt hours per year. Now, with the later, you can churn out between 43,000 and 65,000 kilowatt hours per year. The larger Seator produces more than enough power in a year to cover the electricity consumption of the average US home, which amounts to about 10,791 kilowatt hours in 2022. But it's important to note here that those of us here in the US tend to use a lot more electricity than other parts of the world, and one of the primary conveniences of SHP is its ability to easily extend to regions without grid access. In other words, well-sited Seator turbines mean more bang for your buck, and the Seator definitely isn't picky. The smaller of the 2 models can submerge to depths of up to 50 meters or 164 feet, with the larger able to operate fully submerged in 20 meters or about 66 feet of water. The turbine needs a minimum head of only 1 meter to function, and it can also perform in water bodies with flows as low as 2 liters per second. You can toss a Seator in rivers and irrigation canals just like other SHP systems. It also has marine applications, allowing you to harness energy from ocean currents and tidal streams. On top of all of that, the turbines can be arranged into an array. Now, while this is an exciting development, the Seator's flexibility isn't infinite. Though its models can take advantage of low flow, low head environments in ways that previously weren't possible with hydro, you can't stick these things everywhere. They won't operate below freezing temperatures, and their official manual recommends ice plugging screens to protect them under these conditions. Now, that's one point for dams, which instead rely on reservoirs that are often deep enough to avoid winter work stoppages. Then there's of course the perils of sharing the river with natural debris and of course, fish. It doesn't seem that the Seator has built-in safeguards against these. Rather, the manuals suggest using intake screens and limiting the amount of water that flows through the system in order to protect the wildlife and the device itself. Now, even though a Seator system probably has a significantly lower environmental impact than a traditional dam, it still has the potential to negatively affect flora and fauna both in and out of the water. So how can we take small hydro a step further in the name of protecting wildlife? Well, Turbulent is one company aiming to answer that question. Based in Belgium, Turbulent markets its submersive Vortex turbine as an eco and fish-friendly form of hydropower. It also happens to look a lot like a snail when viewed from above. Or a whistle? Or maybe a noisemaker? The golden ratio? You could probably develop a personality quiz based on what you see here. Any way you interpret its design, Turbulent's smaller version of its turbine only needs a head of 1.5 meters or about 5 feet, and a flow of 1.5 cubic meters per second, which is about 53 cubic feet per second. As a result, Turbulent's scalability definitely opens up a lot of possibilities. And like other diversionary hydro systems, Turbulent setups involve directing flowing water through a channel to its turbine, so no reservoir required. So how much power are we talking about? Here's how the specs shake out. Of course, you've got to fit the turbine to the job. Turbulent offers multiple impeller dimensions to size turbine setups in line with the dimensions of the site at hand. So currently its power output ranges from 15 to 70 kilowatts. It's worth noting here that you can also string together multiple Turbulent turbines along the same body of water. And remember, we're talking about a near continuous energy source. Rivers aren't as capricious as the wind and don't shut down for the night the way solar panels do. In fact, Turbulent claims that a micropower plant based on its tech can boast up to a 90% plant factor, which is also known as capacity factor. And capacity factor basically boils down to the difference between what's planned and what actually happens, just measured in electricity. It's a comparison of a power plant's actual production versus its potential production, based on how long it's up and running. Now for reference, solar's capacity factor varies, but on average it tends to lie somewhere between 10 and 30%. On a global level, utility scale solar's capacity factor averaged out to about 17% in 2022. And while that sounds like a big negative, it's still a massive amount of power that solar produces. This isn't to say that Turbulent turbines are intermittency proof. The company itself notes that seasonality is still a concern. Water height is, well, fluid. It ebbs and flows along with the rain and heat. That means in the hotter summers, you might have a thinner stream that leaves you producing less energy. Then there's the problem of winter. Turbulent has added a rubber coating to their turbines that acts as a defense against ice. If the water freezes, it expands against the rubber, squishing it without damaging the components. The ice simply stops the power generation. So the design can't completely defeat intermittency, but it does extend the life of the turbine. Now with this in mind, you might be wondering, why bother with multiple mini plants when you could just pool your resources into one macro plant? Well, generally speaking, as factors like flow and head scale up, so does the amount of electricity generated, but so do the dangers involved. Going back to the Itaipu Dam for a sec, the risk-reward ratio is very plain. Between its 20 turbines at 700 megawatts each, its max production capacity tops out at 14 gigawatts. And these specs provide enough to cover around 90% of Paraguay's electricity consumption and 15% of Brazil's. At the same time, 13 years passed from the start of construction to the start of operations. By Itaipu's completion, the project had destroyed the Guaira Falls and consequently set off an influx of more than 30 invasive species between the regions that they had previously separated. On top of this, the governments of Brazil and Paraguay ultimately displaced at least 65,000 people in their joint effort to establish the dam. Meanwhile, it took the Turbulent team less than a day to install a 13 kilowatt turbine in the Ayung River of Bali, Indonesia. The turbine supplies power to the adjacent Green School, serving over 700 students and staff. And better yet, the setup doesn't impact the ability for fish to move freely, and the river's natural flow is left undisturbed. That's just one of many examples of Turbulent projects that you can find all over the map, from the Philippines to Chile. Thinking smaller rather than bigger also means avoiding the compounding environmental damage that manifests after the dust has settled. Remember how I mentioned dam failures earlier? Well, since record keeping began, an average of 10 dam failures occur in a given year here in the US. Most of these happen at smaller sites, which thankfully limits the toll. But when things at a major dam go awry, it can cost human lives, require extensive evacuations, and devastate surrounding ecosystems. Overall, large dams can only be located in specific places and can drastically affect the ecosystem. However, they do generate lots of power, are less influenced by seasonal variations, and are generally low maintenance, long-lasting installations. SHPs are more flexible in terms of installation locations since they don't require much hydraulic head and are easier on the environment. It's good for the consumer and local power generation or off-grid needs too. As of 2019, small hydropower systems, that is, hydro rated less than 10 megawatts, had a global installed capacity of about 78 gigawatts. That's according to the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. That's quite a ways behind solar and wind. Small hydro is meant to work in tandem with other renewables though, and there's certainly no shortage of locations available to expand. But what do you think about decentralized and small hydro? Jump in the comments and let me know. I'll see you in the next one.